Good morning, Confluence family. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're staying safe, staying off the roads as much as possible. We are beginning a series here at Confluence for the next 4 or 5, maybe 6 weeks on what is worship. And what an important concept for us to grasp, to understand scripturally what it is that we are supposed to do when we worship the Lord. I wanted to share a story real quick with you guys. When I had moved from Illinois to Colorado Springs a handful of years ago, I went on a church search. I wanted to find a place where I could worship the Lord. And I think this is the typical experience of most people when they are looking for a church. They kind of have their grade list of, oh, the pastor was friendly, the people were welcoming, or so on and so forth. I think the biggest grading mark that we look for when we look for a church is, how was worship? Was the music engaging? Was it exciting? Did it really get my attention? Did I feel good when I sang these songs? Did I know the songs? Or were they, was the band in tune, or were they pretty bad? Worship, I think, is one of our biggest misconceptions scripturally. When I was looking for a church in Colorado Springs, I remember arriving at one pretty good-sized church, and the music was just awesome. It was great. The band actually had a CD that they had put out each year, and so I thought, wow, I feel good when I sing this music. It seems to be about God, and man, I think I found a good church to go to. Then I bought the CD, and as the Lord was working in my heart and changing me, something dawned on me. Wow, there's something really interesting about this CD. And most of these songs are typical American Christian worship songs, where they were about what God is doing for me. I feel this way, God, please help. I can do this in worship of you forever, God. I could sing of your love forever. That sort of thing. As I was listening to the 10 or 11 songs on this CD, I kind of gave myself a challenge. I said, all right, I would like to find at least one song on here that is about God, not about me. So I listened to song number 1. It was about my heart's cry, my desire to follow the Lord. So I thought, okay, I'll go to the next song. Kind of the same concept, where it's about me. It's about me. I feel so bad about being so far away, blah, blah, blah. So I thought, surely somewhere on the CD there's a song, at least one song, that says to God how great He is. I went through song by song. Not one single song on that CD really worshiped the Lord. It was talking about the Lord in particular and how He was meeting my needs. It had nothing to do with His greatness or His goodness or His majesty. It was all about me. I think that's our typical experience when it comes to worship. I know for me it was for quite a long time until I had that eye-opening experience. As we look at Scripture, as we see what a biblical model for worship is, I want to throw down a challenge to me, to myself, and to you guys as well. Every preconception you've had about what worship really is, set it aside, put it on the table, and let the Scripture do the talking. Let the Bible inform us of what really needs to happen. When we go to the Old Testament, we see a completely different picture of worship. Actually, there wasn't a whole lot of music up front. What I see when it comes to worship is this. Whenever one of the patriarchs of Scripture, whether it was Abraham or Moses, even Noah after the flood, when they encountered God, they would build an altar and sacrifice something. And Scripture would say, and he worshiped God. There are two things that I think are vital to worship. That's sacrifice, and then bowing down. Throughout Scripture, you also see where someone who encounters God, they fall on their face as if they're dead. They bow down. They worship the Lord. And I think that's those two things, sacrifice and bowing down. Those things are completely absent from mainstream Christian worship. What do we see in Scripture? What happens in worship then? What else? The Lord put together a system of worship, which included sacrifice. That was the center point, because it was a sign of what was to come, the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. And so that form of worship, of sacrificing for atonement for sin, was first and foremost on the hearts of the believers. And so you see in the Psalms, from about Psalm 120 through the end of the Psalms, about 145, you see what are called Psalms of Ascent. And what that is a picture of is, as the worshipers were coming together to Jerusalem, to where the temple was, to worship God, they were going up to the mountain to sacrifice. These psalms were so incredibly honest about their heart struggles, about their fears, about the things that had a hold of their lives. So we see going up the mountain as heart preparation for sacrifice. Then, when we get to sacrifice, when Old Testament worshipers would actually get to the temple and it was time to sacrifice, they would sacrifice fully. The animal that they would present as an offering to God, they would kill it. It required blood. It required totality. So we have coming up the mountain as heart prep. We have sacrifice as a totality of worship. And then, if as we fast forward into the New Testament, in Romans 12:1, Paul exhorts the church to be living sacrifices to God. Make yourself a living sacrifice. So I see three elements of modern day worship. In a sense, we're not walking up to a mountain to sacrifice, but there's heart prep. Number two, it requires a totality of sacrifice. Worship does. And then the third thing is there's an ongoing self-sacrifice. I think one very important question that we need to ask is what worship is not. And one thing that we definitely need to remove from our minds is worship is not a feel-good elixir that we need to go to worship so we can feel better about ourselves. Also, we treat worship like it's a spectator sport. We're there to worship. The biggest change, the biggest shift that needs to happen in order to have a biblical view of what worship is, to go from where we are at now to where Scripture tells us worship is this. We treat church, we treat worship just like we would a Rotary Club meeting or some sort of convention or a movie or some sort of other spectator event where we go, we sit down in the most comfortable seat possible, and we take in. We're consumers. And again, we do the grading thing, even once we have found a church. Oh man, the pastor's message, that was a few minutes too long. It went way beyond noon. Not cool. Or, man, we heard that same set of worship songs 3 weeks in a row now. No good, no good. We come to church as consumers so many times where we take in. And yet, if we see worship scripturally, that we are here to sacrifice and to bow down, that shifts everything. Instead of us taking in when we go to worship God, I think the real meaning of worship is that we're giving out. We are sacrificing
to the Lord. That's huge. Then a few things as far as what worship is. A couple things. It's an event. When we come together and we worship the Lord in a church setting, we can worship the Lord in many ways, through music, through giving, through listening, through engaging with the word of the Lord, collectively and individually. There's a level of submission that is a major element of worship. Then again, looking at the totality of sacrifice, worship is letting go of everything. I think there's a concept that we need to grab a hold of here. It's what I call empty-handed living, or empty-handed heart living. Just to illustrate this, several years ago, I was visiting a church that was a little bit more on the charismatic side. But one thing I really appreciate that the worship leader did was to explain, why they would raise their hands in worship. Prior to that point, I was very uncomfortable with that. It seemed weird and super emotional. It was just bizarre to me. I didn't understand why that happened. But then after that Sunday morning, I turned into a hand raiser. And here's why. Sitting in front of me during the worship leader's explanation was this little old lady. She had to be in her late 70s or 80s. And the worship leader had us do something. He said, okay, act like you're holding on to something. Now, raise your hands with that something. And that something is whatever it is that's preventing you from being close to God. Whether it's just a heart attitude that's wrong, or a bad relationship, or maybe you have some doubts that are getting in the way. The worship leader said, all right, now open your hands and let those things go. Just mentally let them go. Now, when you sing, the worship leader said, when you raise your hands, whatever that morning, whatever is in the way of you and worshiping the King of Kings, let it go. He also went on to say, as an example, so you're letting go of stuff when you raise your hands. It's kind of a mental illustration to help you do that. He went on to say that it's kind of like a little child raising his hands up to his daddy who wants to just be held. And I know that sometimes when I've come to church, when my heart is hurting, when I'm confused, when I am just worn out, I just want to be held by my Abba Father. I want to be close. I might not have clever words to say, or I might not have the best sacrifice on the planet, but I just want to be close to my Father in heaven. And so that's kind of like a little baby, a little toddler, Xander, or Max, or Elian, raising their hands up, wanting to be held. That's what this is all about. When we raise our hands, empty-handed living is the same thing. Now, one of my favorite Christian leaders in recent history, Bill McCartney, who led the men's movement called Promise Keepers several years ago. And one thing he said in a book was this, that the Christian life is not a give-and-take proposition where you can give one thing to God and hold tightly on to another. It's an all-or-nothing proposition. When we come to church, when you guys come to, whether it's big church or little church, we all have things in our hands when we come to worship God. Whether it's doubts or fears or things that we're confused about in Scripture. When we worship, we cannot let go of the easy things to let go of. Like, oh, okay, I had a bad day yesterday, I'll just give that to God. But then here, holding tightly on to, you know what, I really can't see God's goodness in the Old Testament. Or, you know what, why does God let bad things happen to good people? And we'll get to that later. And hold tightly onto that. And then trying to worship God with one open hand. Open-handed living is this, that you open up your hands and let go of everything. That doesn't mean that you can't doubt, that you can't question. God's big enough, He can handle all of our doubts and questions. But we can't let those things inhibit our wholehearted worship of God, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. It's all or nothing. Sacrifice, just the nature of sacrifice, means we are in submission to the one to whom we are worshiping, the one to whom we're sacrificing. We have no say in the matter when it comes to sacrifice. Again, we're not consumers. We are giving out. We are sacrificers. So when God says, I want your heart, I want everything, I want your first fruits, your best, we can't hold back and hold tightly onto something and try to worship God with one open hand. Open-handed living is this, that we release everything to the Lord. Everything. That's open-handed living. That, I think, is the key to understanding worship. So this first week, this intro to our series on what is worship. Yeah, there are the three aspects that we'll talk about more over the next few weeks. There's going up the mountain en route to worshiping, to sacrificing to God. So that's heart preparation. And then there's the sacrifice. We're going to give something to God. We're going to give everything to God. And then, as Paul says, we're going to be a living sacrifice. The art, the craft of empty-handed living is so, so important. I pray that we all can grasp this and come to worship, letting go of everything. Because the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, demands everything. He deserves everything that we have, good, bad, and ugly. Guys, I thank you so much for listening to me ramble on. I'm very excited about worshiping alongside with you guys. I'm eager to see what God is going to do with this. Take care. God bless. Stay safe. And throughout the week, worship God.